Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Brittany Aubain, filling in for Kib and Aline, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, March is Multiple Sclerosis Awareness Month. This disease is known to affect women between the ages of 25 and 44 years old. A neurologist from Montefiore Multiple Sclerosis Centers joins me to tell us more. How has treatment changed for MS in the last 30 years? Then, after dealing with the family tragedy, one doctor is fighting for health equity. A neuro-oncologist from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center joins me to tell us more about all of his efforts. What can we do to promote equity within healthcare for all? After that, Women's Empire is hosting an event called Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories, in order to honor the achievements of women in various categories. The founder of Women's Empire joins me later to tell us all the details. What can viewers expect from this event? And finally, Google launched the Black Founders Fund program to help address disparities facing Black entrepreneurs. The COO of WhoseYourLandlord joins us to tell us how this fund helped her organization. How has this program helped Black business owners? So stay tuned. All this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello everyone, I'm Brittany Aubain, filling in for Kib and Aline, and today is Tuesday, March 28th. You are now watching Open, a live program bringing the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. In the month of March, healthcare professionals recognize Multiple Sclerosis Awareness Month. Throughout the country, time is dedicated toward educating people about the disease and how it's affecting the lives of those who live with it. Neurologist from Montefiore Multiple Sclerosis Centers, Dr. Lauren Gluck, joins me to discuss. Dr. Gluck, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So to start off, can you just give us a brief overview of what is multiple sclerosis?
Multiple sclerosis is a neurological disease that happens when the immune system attacks itself. Now, we have been hearing about the immune system with COVID for so long. We know it's supposed to protect us from infections, but sometimes it gets confused and starts attacking our own body. And in the case of multiple sclerosis, it can cause damage in the brain, the spinal cord, and the optic nerves that help us see. So multiple sclerosis is actually the most common cause of neurologic injuries next to trauma, next to actual physical injury in the country.
And who is most at risk for this disease?
The most common onset of this disease happens in people when they're in their 20s or 30s, although it can affect people as young as children and as old as their 70s or 80s. But it is most common to turn up in your young adulthood. We think it's more common in women, but plenty of men have this disease. It's common across all ethnic and racial categories. It doesn't necessarily run in families, although in people who have other autoimmune diseases in their family, they may be at a slightly higher risk. But this is certainly not something that passes down guaranteed generation to generation.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I was going to ask if there are any genetic variables that run into being diagnosed with MS, but if there are any more particular causes that lead to MS, can you explain that a little bit?
Of course. It gets a little complicated because there is a genetic basis. There are pieces of genes called alleles that a person has to have over 200 of them to be at risk for multiple sclerosis. And that's how some of that relationship to family comes into play. But then other things affect a person at risk, like their environment, particularly smoking cigarettes, having childhood or adolescent obesity. And there's more and more evidence that maybe being exposed to a virus called Epstein-Barr, which causes the mononucleosis or mono or kissing disease, may be that extra risk factor that makes someone at risk develop the disease in actuality.
Thank you for clarifying that. And also, the age range for somebody that MS most affects are women between the age 25 and 44. Now, this is a time in which women are, wanting to go all in on their families or on their careers. So can you tell us if there are any signs that someone who's developing MS should look out for?
So the signs of an MS attack or exacerbation or flare-up include weakness in one limb, like an arm or a leg or half the body on the same side. That happens over a day or a few days. It can be numbness in one arm or one leg or half the body. It can be decreasing vision in one eye. And now these sound like very scary symptoms that, of course, you would go to a doctor about, but especially when we're busy, if you have young children at home, if you have a job or things just going on, we rationalize a lot of things that happen to our body. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it is important to take that more seriously and kind of take stock of what's going on. So if something happens that's progressing over a few days, that is very much outside of your normal, it's worth checking in with your doctor to make sure that nothing more dangerous needs to be addressed.
Thank you. And is there a particular age in which we should start looking out for these signs?
So the wonder of neurology is that so many things happen in our body on a daily basis that may not be 100% normal. You may feel a twitch or a tingle or a headache. And if it lasts, generally speaking, for a few seconds or a few minutes, sometimes even a few hours, it's likely okay. But so I never ask people to write down every abnormal thing they ever feel, because you can really go down a dangerous path that way and get hyper focused on things that you don't need to. So like I said, the guideline I tend to give my patients is, if you notice something getting worse over the course of a day, maybe into the next day, that's the time to call your doctor. If you're older, though, if you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, heart disease, and you suddenly develop a new problem, like all of a sudden weakness, all of a sudden vision loss, even if it only lasts a few minutes, we do have to consider stroke. And that is a much more emergent problem where you have to go to the hospital. But because multiple sclerosis tends to affect young people more, who have fewer of these other comorbid illnesses or additional illnesses, that tends to be a very different conversation. But since I'm talking to everyone, I want to make sure that that's clear too.
Absolutely. And can you tell me a little bit about how this disease affects somebody's everyday life?
So multiple sclerosis affects everyone differently. So I say everyone's MS is different. That some people feel fine. Some people feel mostly fine, but have days when they're very fatigued, or they have nerve pain that comes up every so often. And some people who've had damage to their nervous system that causes ongoing weakness or difficulty walking. And so an important thing to think about is, it may not be the same every day. You may have to change what your normal level of activity is. But the purpose of having a doctor and having a neurologist, and ideally having a multiple sclerosis specialist neurologist, is to help keep you living the life you want to live and protecting you from this disease.
Absolutely. And speaking of living the life you want to live, what are the medical and social aspects of caring for people with this disease?
The first thing that's important to know if you have a friend or a loved one who has MS is to listen to them. They may feel different on different days, and it's not because they don't want to hang out with you or because they don't want to go to your event or they don't want to call you on the phone. Some days they may feel worse, and it's not personal, and they're not making it up. It's a very variable illness that hopefully people feel well most of the time, but sometimes that's not the case. So I think that's the most important, most basic thing I'd say to anyone with a loved one with MS. But so it's important to listen to them. It's important to kind of recognize the speed they need to move at, both metaphorically and literally, and help with, dealing with stress. And if they need someone to listen to, that can be a really good role for you to take with your loved one, to listen to their needs.
Yeah, for sure. And what does treatment look like for this community?
Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, right now, there's no cure for multiple sclerosis. There's a lot of research going into it, though. But we do have a lot of excellent treatments that help control the disease and prevent more disability related to the disease, both physical and mental disability. So there's more than 20 FDA-approved medicines to prevent multiple sclerosis-related disease. And I generally recommend for all of my patients to be on one of them, but depending on patients' severity of their disease, how they are feeling, what they're kind of willing to take in terms of medicine, other medical issues, different medicines are right for different people. And that's a big conversation that you should have with your doctor.
And as you mentioned, I want to circle back to when you said there is no cure, and you're absolutely right. Now, there has been much progression over the last 30 years when it comes to MS treatment. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so the first MS therapy to control MS disease came out in 1993. Now that's in my lifetime. So since then, we've developed much more effective, relatively safe medicine that people can be on for a long time, because multiple sclerosis, once you have it, it stays with you forever. So it's a much better treatment landscape, we say in the medical field. More colloquially, I'll say, it's not your grandma's multiple sclerosis. People can be on medicine much more quickly into their disease, much more effective medicine that prevents that damage from building up over time.
And lastly, I just want to ask, how should families help their loved ones suffering with MS?
I think it's a very similar question to how can family and friends do this too, but listening to your family member is important and encouraging them to make healthy choices. And the first part of that is going to the doctor. Sometimes people feel very overwhelmed when they're first diagnosed or after many years of diagnosis. But the purpose of the doctor, and what I see my purpose for my patients, is to keep people as healthy as possible. If they're feeling well, I want to keep them feeling well. If they're feeling less well, I want to help them feel better. So I think there's always a reason to follow up regularly with your doctor, to engage in exercise, in more healthy eating practices with more fresh fruits and vegetables and lean meats that we think may have a positive effect with multiple sclerosis, and doing things to decrease stress and promote mental health, because having a better outlook, better mood is also very helpful for all of these things.
Absolutely. Dr. Gluck, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. To stay updated with all the efforts of Multiple Sclerosis Centers, please go to www.montefiore.org/neurology-services or follow them on social media at Montefiinst. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more Open after this.
COVID-19 has changed how we spend weekends with the girls. Now it's time to take the first step that lets us get back to brunching instead of late-night munching. Before we can safely come together, we need the facts. As COVID-19 vaccines become available, you may have questions.
Should I get it?
Is it safe? Should I wait?
It's okay to have questions. Now get the facts at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you.
Jason, let's go see your room.
What do you think? We kept it a little spare, so you can decorate it how you like.
Dinner!
Go. Excellent. Sorry for the slump. Yeah, I saw you guys out there. We're in the room.
¿Qué color? Perfecto, mijo.
Gracias. Thank you.
What's wrong, mijo?
Donating to a pet's medical care is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Welcome back. After losing his brother to a preventable medical condition, Dr. Joshua Budhu pursued a career in healthcare. As a first-generation Guyanese American, Dr. Budhu uses his career to advocate for health equity, addressing the disparities affecting low-income communities of color. The doctor now joins me to discuss his efforts. Dr. Budhu, thank you for joining us.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me here.
So to start off, why should healthcare for low-income communities and communities of color require a nuanced approach?
Yeah, so this is a really important question, and the reason why is that there are these things called the social determinants of health. And these are the social, economic, cultural, and environmental factors that actually really influence health and health outcomes. Mm-hmm. So these specifically are kind of where we're from, how we look like, how much money we make, our education, our health literacy, our legal status. Are we undocumented or not? And all of these, we've figured out that they actually contribute much more to our overall health, about 80% actually. And as we kind of realize that, you really need to start taking a more nuanced and kind of individualized approach to healthcare. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of figuring out what resources people have and then trying to go and work with it. For example, if I prescribe a treatment and there's a $500 copay, how are we actually going to go and get that treatment if you can't afford that copay? Mm-hmm. So that's when a lot of the nuances really harken on the social determinants of health.
Absolutely. And in your experience as a Guyanese American, how has that impacted how you and your family interact with the healthcare system?
Yeah, so I will say a lot of this is kind of colored by my brother's passing. He passed away when I was a sophomore in college, and that event, coupled with kind of our experience of being immigrants from Guyana and coming to this country, really influenced the way that we look at health and healthcare. And there was this kind of big mistrust and distrust that really formed from the healthcare system. And as a doctor, as a physician now in the healthcare system, I realize that, especially when trying to provide help to and health care to communities who are often marginalized and more vulnerable, that we really need to work on that trust aspect. And that's really one of the most important things that we can do as healthcare providers.
And speaking of your brother, can you tell me a little bit about his experience with law enforcement in the health system?
So this happened in 2008, and he actually was arrested while driving under the influence. And he had few kind of scrapes, so they brought him to one of the local hospitals in Queens. And we didn't know this at the time, but he was never arraigned. He was there in the hospital for 6 days straight, and he was handcuffed the entire time, so unable to move. And he eventually died of a preventable medical condition, a pulmonary embolus, a blood clot that had developed because he was laying still because they had handcuffed him. And his experience really opened my eyes up to kind of what are the contributors to health and healthcare? Why did he land in that situation? And overall, ended up being one of the really the events that sparked me to do the work that I do.
I'm sorry to hear that. And in an interview with New York One, you stated the death of your brother helped you realize the social detriments of health. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, these are the kind of broader determinants. So these economic, social, cultural, environmental factors that all contribute to our health. And when I look at what happened to my brother, it wasn't until I kind of learned about the social determinants of health and started researching them that, when I looked at him, I realized that this wasn't just some one-off incident. There was a high probability that if that didn't happen, if he didn't die then he was on the road to some other cause in the next few years. And this was kind of because of, one, his insurance status. He was on Medicaid. We were Guyanese immigrants that didn't have much healthcare training or knowledge or experience. He was overweight and kind of developed diabetes, living in the food desert that we grew up in. And all of these contributed to his overall health status. And if it wasn't this incident, then it could have been something else just a few years later.
Yeah. And earlier you mentioned, maybe prescribing somebody a treatment and them having a $500 copay, and that's just one of the many disparities. So can you just tell us, what are some unique disparities communities of color and low-income communities face?
Yeah. So aside from kind of the financial differences that communities of color and marginalized communities face, a big part of actually is environmental factors. So if you think back to redlining and kind of structural issues that happened in the 1800s, 1900s, and even that are happening now. Think about where the highways are, right? Across Bronx, the pollution that kind of comes out from that. And when we think about where factories are, where kind of, different kind of roadways and such, they're mainly located near poorer communities, near communities of color. And these really disproportionately affect our most vulnerable communities.
Yeah, and speaking of most vulnerable communities, how do these disparities, how do they change for those who come from immigrant or undocumented families?
Yeah, so this is an even added kind of barrier for people who are undocumented. One part really because of the insurance status and kind of the access to health care. So most people get health care through their jobs, and a lot of the jobs that undocumented immigrants have don't provide health insurance. And if you are there is emergency Medicaid, which is for undocumented immigrants, but it's really limited just really to kind of emergent situations, doesn't provide preventive care. And for me, I see patients who are on emergency Medicaid, and for cancer treatment, it doesn't really provide for a lot of the other kind of treatments that you really need and the other services that you need to have an adequate kind of treatment for cancer.
Absolutely. And knowing what you know now and knowing your personal experience, knowing what you know now about the healthcare system, what is your experience now that you are in the healthcare system?
Yeah. So I will say it's really an honor and a privilege to be taking care of patients and to be serving the communities that I'm from. And my kind of experiences of being both a caregiver, a family member of a patient, and a patient myself have given me the lived experiences that I can bring with me and figure out also how to make the healthcare system better. And this has given me kind of what I'd say a unique perspective in working on more of these social determinants of health, working on ways that we can improve health and healthcare of marginalized communities by, one, working together directly in the community, but also addressing some of these other factors, such as housing, food security, and realizing how much more that they contribute overall to health.
Of course. And I want to congratulate you because you were accepted into a program by the Drug Research Program, Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, to support diversity in clinical trials. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. And so this is a grant that I was awarded it's called the Robert A. Wynn Career Development Grant, and its focus is on improving diversity in clinical trials. And this is really, really important. Because when we think about some of the cutting edge and new treatments and medicines that we're developing, we do these through clinical trials. And unfortunately, historically, and even now, the population of clinical trials is not diverse. And we really want to have representation so that the communities we are serving are actually getting the treatments that we have. So this is really important, and just providing both access to new drugs, new therapies, as well as it's just good science, because if we're not representative in the populations that we're treating, we don't know if there's differences in how people respond to different drugs. And so it's kind of a multi-faceted good thing to have diversity in clinical trials.
100%. It is very important. And can you tell me what are some of the current issues with clinical trials?
Yeah. So I'll kind of focus on one issue that I think that's really important, and it's been the historical mistrust. That's kind of, and I would say historical, but also a very well-deserved mistrust of the medical system in terms of science and experimentation. And that's the thing we really need to work on. in which clinical trials and clinical research, for example, for me as a neuro-oncologist, these actually represent some of the first-line therapies that I can give to my patients. And if we don't have the trust, if someone thinks they're going to be experimented on or thinking that they're a guinea pig, then it's just not going to work. So a big part of that is actually, one, increasing the diversity of the workforce, having people who have cultural competency, humility, and also just concordant care to speak the same language. So those are all really important issues to work on.
Of course. And what can we do to promote equity within the realm of healthcare for all?
Yeah. So yeah, this is a really important question too. And I think the things that I really want to stress is that really the awareness of how awareness of how important the social determinants of health are. And when we think about it, food is health. So food insecurity, housing is health. So actually having stable housing, and all of these things, how they contribute to healthcare. And I'll say that, so in my current work at Memorial Sloan Kettering, I work with the Immigrant Health and Cancer Disparity Service, and we're working on these interventions directly because we realize that they have impact on our patients and making sure that they are able to get to their appointments, they're able to take their medications, and overall just lead a healthier lifestyle.
Absolutely. And lastly, circling back to the story about your brother, I just want to ask, should there be something set in place to ensure the safety and health of people who have been arrested and incarcerated, and what should that look like?
Yeah. So when you want to talk about a vulnerable class and incarcerated, the incarcerated population has so many other barriers put onto them. And that's kind of one, just because they're kind of they're institutionalized, they're in the system, and there's so many barriers to get actually good preventive care as well as kind of ongoing and continuous continuity of care. So yes, I think there should be kind of better systems in place so that we can make sure that regardless if someone is arrested or if they're incarcerated, that they have access to adequate health care. And it goes back to what health equity is, and equity is that we really are striving for everyone to have the opportunity to have their best healthy outcomes and the best life that they can lead.
Absolutely. Dr. Budhu, I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. To stay in touch with Dr. Joshua Budhu, please follow him on Twitter at Joshua Budhu. And to stay informed on all the works for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, please go to their website at www.mskcc.org. Stay tuned. We have more open for you right after this.
I don't know why you're so sad. You've got a roof over your head.
Bro, you gotta stop with that depression stuff. That's a white people thing.
Escúchame, en esta casa, los hombres no lloran.
You alright?
It just feels like it's coming from everywhere.
Do you want to talk about it?
Thanks for hearing me out, bro. Appreciate it.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Man, it's lonely. Like, going through life lonely.
There is the therapeutic aspect of music, just expressing how you feel. I'm going to talk to Howie about his feelings, make it into a song.
You can now watch MNN, Brick TV, QPTV, and SIC TV on BronxNet. Tune in to BX Omni, Channel 67 Optimum, 2133 Fios during most Sunday evenings. We'll show you some amazing content from our friends at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Brick TV in Brooklyn, Queens Public Television, and Staten Island Community Television. Every borough represented in the Boogie Down. Epic partnerships for the ages. And catch our new Next channel, produced in partnership with MNN, 24/7 on BronxNet Channel 952 Optimum and 2138 Fios.
Welcome back. The organization Women's Empire aims to empower and break down the barriers holding women back. In honor of Women's History Month, the organization will hold an event titled Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories, highlighting women who have been active in their communities. Joining me to discuss is founder of Women's Empire, Anika Joseph. Anika, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So to start off, can you just tell us a little bit about your organization, Women's Empire?
So Women's Empire is a not-for-profit organization that was founded by me in 2016 with the desire to do and have more conversations with women, specifically women of color, around topics that we felt mattered. And since then, we have been curating events across Brooklyn, Manhattan, and the Bronx that caters to our 5 core principles.
And what inspired this organization?
I would say, so those who've been have had the privilege of going to school, whether high school, undergrad, or even attending a master program, there are opportunities on the campus or through just local education where specific conversation and groups are held to talk about finance, health, wellness. When you're in that working space, you don't necessarily have those types of groups anymore. So what we wanted to do is to continue to have these conversations that you would typically get in a local school or a different type of environment setting and bring that into the community, because we wanted to still have these conversations that were important around health and finance and entrepreneurship outside of that standard educational location.
And when was it that you realized that this was the message that you wanted to spread with Women's Empire?
I think when we started in 2016, the desire mainly came from there, because I noticed there were not that many groups that were offering these types of conversations in a safe space for women, and all women, not necessarily women of color, but for all women. You don't necessarily after work find a group where you're, oh, here, I'm just going to go talk about health and wellness in this particular space. In most, 9-to-5s, everyone's going home to their families. So we wanted to create that and bring that into the community, and specifically communities of color.
Absolutely. And your organization focuses on the areas of education, finance, entrepreneurship, ending violence. How do some of these models and these concepts lead to the road of women's empowerment?
So we wanted to offer a 360 degree of empowerment in a woman's life. So if you empower a woman in her home, in her workplace, and as well as in her community, and with those 5 pillars we're allowed to do that, cover all of those topics, we felt like that is a well-rounded group of topics that if you empower women with these particular educational tools and resources, you're able to make an impact in the home, in their community, as well as in the workplace.
Of course. And the principles Women's Empire follow are created by the UN Global Compact and UN Women. What about these principles stand out to you and that inspired your organization to follow them?
Specifically, what highlighted for us and our team was the focus on gender equality and equity. And that's a big component of the principles from the UN Women. And we decided to incorporate that into our mission and our focus, because we think in the overall topic of empowerment, you need to be able to show that there is a balance that's needed in gender equity and in gender equality for women. So that's why we incorporated those, and we felt like those were validated resources, those were validated principles that we can tie into our organization today.
And on March 30th, women can attend an event titled Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories. Tell us all about it.
So this event is a very free event open to the public, and it's our opportunity for us to celebrate women. Prior to 1920, women of color were not necessarily celebrated, and that's Asian American women, Native American, Latino women, as well as Black women were not necessarily celebrated. And this is our opportunity to continue that opportunity of celebrating women who actually play a role since the women's suffrage movement and actually play a role in our history today. So additional to it being focused focused on a panel of 5 women who we have identified to speak on our very specific topics pertaining to our pillars. We wanted to make this a free and open event to the public to just come out, celebrate whatever your gender, whatever your racial background. This is an opportunity to not miss out on Women's History Month and celebrate. And that's why we're having this free and open event. Usually our events are very focused on educational topics, where we expound on issues of hate crime and gender bias, but we wanted to also incorporate a huge piece of celebration, because how often are women always celebrated?
Absolutely. I encourage everybody to go check out this event. And since there is a focus on women of color, how is the celebration of women a bit different from more mainstream celebrations for Women's History Month?
I don't think it's far too different. I think there is a big focus on gender equity. We are going to cover topics specifically from our panelists who will talk about how they've navigated the spaces as women of color, because we do think it's a bit different. We're all fighting for equity to some degree, and Women's History Month has always been inclusive of all women. However, there are additional barriers that sometimes women of color face. So we wanted to make sure that these women were represented and have an opportunity to tell their story, so it can impact how we also live our lives, so we could navigate those spaces much better.
Absolutely. And can you talk about how you found the panelists and how they stood out to you?
So, but using our 5 pillars, as we discussed earlier, education, finance, entrepreneurship, health and wellness, as well as advocacy, which is our end of violence against women, we wanted to identify a woman in each of these sectors who live in New York City, specifically also the Bronx, so they can bring this information to the table and to women that are attending the event and have an opportunity to share their resources. So we did a lot of research. I have an excellent team who just did some digging, social media, YouTube, Googling, and identifying women across the city who represent those 5 pillars and are open to telling your story.
Absolutely. And can you tell me a little bit about the importance of holding an event for Bronx women?
I think it's important to offer events in spaces where these topics are not necessarily discussed openly. As I mentioned earlier, if you're not necessarily part of a specific group, or sometimes even on a college or high school campus, there is no opportunity to talk about these specific topics in a free setting. And that's one of the things that we want to focus on, is offering a free event. And in the Bronx, we know that there are many different hurdles and barriers for women of color, also for men of color as well. So we wanted to make sure that this is an opportunity where folks can come out and learn more about what is Women's History Month, and why are we celebrating, and why are we tying some of our topics to gender equality. So we wanted to bring that specifically to a community within the Bronx that we know is looking for this information, and we do think that this is information that's valued.
Absolutely. And just tell me a little bit, was there anything specific that you experienced in your work life or personal life that led to Women's Empire and holding an event like this?
I believe so. I am from the beautiful island of St. Lucia, and I would say I grew up, as a Black girl, poor, coming from the island. So being able to bring topics that I was privy to in college and in high school, where I know some of my peers did not get an opportunity to deep dive on, health disparities and, really talking deep down about finance. And I wanted to bring that information to the table, because this information just living with me is no good it's only going to benefit my family. So I wanted to make sure that we do have subject matter experts all across New York City, and an opportunity and a platform where people can tell their stories, I think, is very, very critical.
Of course. And in addition to this event, your organization has always been about honoring women with special features. Can you talk about why this was important?
So it goes back to this celebrating women. There's a lot of women in many different spaces are doing beautiful things, beautiful crafts, entrepreneurship from their home, starting businesses. And most of the time, they do not have the opportunity to focus a big budget on marketing and getting themselves out there. So what we do in Women's Empire, we allow women to nominate themselves or be nominated by someone to be featured on our website as well as our social media pages. It's just another way to celebrate the achievements and the things that they're doing. And it's open to any woman who would like to be featured. So we just use our platform, the fact that we do have a following, to share some of the beautiful work that women are doing all across New York City.
Of course, and I want to congratulate you because in 2017 you were honored 30 under 30 for the first Caribbean woman. So just tell me a little bit about that honor.
That was a beautiful honor. It was specifically the first St. Lucian to be honored with that 30 under 30 award. And I think it represented an opportunity where there is more that I can do. It was an honor in itself, but it actually paved the way to wanting to do more, knowing that we're still the first in 2017. You're not expecting that, you know, and I went in to receive that honor knowing that the work is not over. It was an amazing opportunity to be around many other Caribbean women who are the first in their islands to break barriers right here in the United States. So it was truly a privilege, but at the same time, it actually put more batteries in my back to do more work to represent my own island, but also to represent the women here.
Of course, congratulations.
Thank you.
And in a minute, I want to talk a little bit about the reception of your event, but this is just one of the many events that your organization hosts. You host theme events and events that men can join. Can you tell me how it helps with ending bias and supporting women's empowerment?
So all of our events are actually always open to men. Men are our allies, and we believe that men specifically, can reinforce some of the things that we're doing. Also just learning about what is this gender equality and what does that necessarily look like. A lot of the time the term itself is completely taken out of context, and you're running a women's organization, people automatically assume that you're not inclusive of men, you don't like men, and that is completely not the truth. So having men at the table is really critical to us, and sometimes we collaborate specifically with men groups. So we can bring both genders together and have that conversation and to understand each other better and to understand perspective. And most of our events are always tied to some sort of social movement. So talking about hate crimes in our community, usually when you talk about hate crime, it's not necessary. You're not thinking of people of color, but there's a lot of specific crimes that are specifically targeted to women and men of color. And we like to talk about that because it's a great opportunity for us to continue and expand on our mission.
Absolutely. I want to congratulate you on your event, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
As a reminder, the Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories event will be taking place on Thursday, March 30th at 1345 East Gun Hill Road. Please go to www.womensempire.org to find out more. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Open after this.
Most hiring algorithms would scream me out.
Some bosses couldn't see me as a leader.
I've run this place for 20 years, but I still need to prove that I'm more than what you see on paper.
I've been running code as long as I've been able to reach a keyboard.
This is what I do. It's second nature for me, coordinating 100 details at once.
It's the way my mind works. I have a very mechanical brain.
I sold them on my skills.
You gotta be so good they can't ignore you.
My magic is
analytics and empathy. That's how getting clients. You have to have the confidence in yourself to show up and defy the odds.
I am more than who I am on paper.
I never got a college degree. And today, I'm the CEO of my own company. People want to tell me I'm one in a million, when actually I'm one of millions. Stars are all around us. It's time for them to shine.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas. You know it's true. Mom, we love you always. Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
Is it time yet?
It's time.
Come start time for dinner.
Oh, terrific.
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Found my heart out there in the open. Trees make you feel small. Can't help but get lost again.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Welcome back. In 2020, Google launched the Black Founders Fund program addressing disparities facing Black entrepreneurs. The program offers funds to help founders with the goal of expanding their business and achieving generational wealth. Recipient of the Black Founders Fund and COO of the organization, Who's Your Landlord, Elisa Davidson joins me to discuss their experience with the program. Elisa, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So to start off, can you briefly tell me a little bit about your organization, Who's Your Landlord?
Yeah, absolutely. So Who's Your Landlord is a web platform. We started off as just a review platform for landlords. We saw an opportunity to change the market and use the insights and sort of like that data that we would get from residents and turned it into a SaaS product where we're able to use those insights and data to inform who we call home providers, but it's more like landlords and property managers, their business. We're also able to change sort of like that market because they're able to use those insights. They're able to use those insights to inform their capital improvements and increase their NOI. So we definitely saw an opportunity there. Our platform hopes to, our entire mission is to center humanity at the heart of housing in order to change that relationship between home providers and residents.
Now, your organization was one of the recipients for Google's Startup Black Founders Fund. Now, for those who don't know, can you tell us a little bit more about the Black Founders Fund?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Google for Startups Black Founders Fund provides non-dilutive cash grants to Black founders at early stage companies. I think one of the biggest things is that selected founders and recipients receive $100,000 in non-dilutive funds and capital. Also, we get like Google Cloud credits and access to Google resources for like hands-on support in order to like help grow our startup.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about how each of your organizations were affected by the support of such a major organization like Google and the fund itself?
Yeah, I think specifically for us, to be transparent, like $100,000 doesn't necessarily change your business by any means. We've raised multi-million dollars. And so, transparently, like $100K doesn't really like move the needle forward. But I think one of the biggest things was having access to such a big name company's resources. So at the time we were closing a round of funding with our seed, and Google was there hands-on, ready to help us, help enacted, a PR strategy along with their Nectar, their PR team. So just being able to have access to those resources was something that was very beneficial to our company. Another thing that I think was super special was Google provided the opportunity for us to have access to free therapy with an executive level coach. So somebody that really understood some of the plights of, growing a team and scaling a team and being a part of like that leadership executive level. And I think, mental health, especially in this industry where, you are going through a lot of hardships, especially as a Black founder, it is great to sort of like have that resource and that access and that opportunity to be able to, work through those hardships.
And speaking some of the hardships, what are some additional disparities that Black founders face outside of traditional overt racism? So income, resources, education. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think especially, I've seen firsthand a lot of the like the no's that we get when it comes to even just raising funds. It's taken us a long time to get in the position to where we are currently. And it's not necessarily that overt racism, but it is very covert, right? Like you'll get like the subtle no's and you're always just wondering just like why. We had been under-resourced for so long. And I think, other Black founders and Black companies, Black-led companies, definitely have that same common experience. But a lot of the times, like you're under-resourced, you're underfunded, even just for, a lot of ideas that like, say for instance, if you had like a white counterpart or any other, like race that is sort of like pitching that idea, they would seemingly be more successful than us. So I think a lot of it is just like the under-resourced, or even just like having your company valued at a lesser value.
Absolutely. And we've heard about racial bias impacting several areas of society. How does it affect those who are business owners and entrepreneurs like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think to sort of like piggyback on what I said before, it's just a lot of the opportunities that I think that we could have, we don't. And so I think it is more of like an uphill battle in that way. Even, getting access to a lot of other funds, right? Like, I mean, it's great that Google had this opportunity specifically for Black founders, but it's not common that we get that opportunity.
Absolutely. And Google says the goals of their funds are to help promising founders grow their businesses and ultimately create generational wealth. What does that mean to you?
I mean, I think for me specifically, like it provides the opportunity to have this like lasting legacy for my family that I decide to have, in the future. It helps really, to your point, create generational wealth where we didn't necessarily have that before, where this is something that I can like pass on once, we really do make it with this organization. And we're definitely in that direction. We're going in that direction pretty swiftly and pretty fast. But it'll help just provide the resources for, people of color, and the opportunities for those that don't necessarily get that look or that first glance, or those opportunities.
Absolutely. And the racial wealth gap is a major concern for many. So how is ownership of a business linked to generational wealth?
Yes. I think for us, like it definitely helps create equity, right? I think in this society, in this generation, in this, in this world that we live in, this universe, we definitely don't necessarily have a lot of that ownership, like systemically, like we've been sort of, placed in the margins. And so this helps create that equity. It helps create more equal and equitable opportunities. It helps create, a lane for and a path for us to be able to hire other, people of color on our team, where, opportunities like this wouldn't come across their plate. And so I think if anything, it's just that equitable, it's a lot of just, equity for us.
Absolutely. And can you tell me a little bit about your experience personally as a Black business owner? What are some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I think a lot of it also comes with like me being like a person of color and a woman in this field, right? I think a lot of that representation in tech isn't really there, and so I tend to get overlooked. Like I tend to not necessarily have a voice in these spaces, but I think with having this company, with being able to like grow and scale this company, like it's definitely showing that like we can change that narrative. And that's definitely something that I'm proud of.
Well, that was absolutely great. And I want to ask you a little bit more about what do you think that this fund means for future generations and seeing the diversity of these funds being handed?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in this entire interview, I've talked a lot about, like opportunity. But I feel as though, right, like it shows that we're moving in the right direction. We are making progress, changing systems that have tended to really like marginalize Black, Black people, Black companies. And I think specifically, right, like it helps provide more access, especially financially. And, it helps, in my opinion, like it'll help decrease sort of like the societal pressures that like Black founders face when it comes to raising funds and scaling and growing a company. And even just, as I sort of like opened up, it helps provide like access to resources that like you didn't necessarily have before. I think one of the biggest things, especially with Google, is the amount. I mean, their name is a massive name. They're a massive company. And so even being able to tap into the resources that they provide is definitely something that I think is such a great opportunity for those that are able to experience it.
And with this resource, you're using your platform to support Black and oppressed communities. And how are your businesses mitigating the disparities Black Americans are facing?
Yeah, I guess is this specific to like our company or just in general?
Your company, yes.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things, like our company specifically, right, like our founder created this this solution because he saw that there was lack of transparency in the rental industry. One of the biggest things that we especially are trying to change is, maybe like discriminatory practices when it comes to providing access to housing specifically for people of color. If that is something that, that is something that they experience when it comes to looking for housing, we're trying to be able to use data in order to show that is a theme or that is something that like that landlord or property manager does. Help increase transparency, provide people with the tools in order to become more like financially literate, but also like housing literate at the same time. And so I think for us specifically, it's all about creating that equitable sort of like that equitable, like lane, and just like equaling the playing field, especially when it comes to people looking for housing. I mean, our biggest thing is that it's so cliche to say, but like housing truly is just like a human right. And I think that like a lot of people just don't see it that way. And it isn't, in my opinion, just like a nice to have. It's a necessity, especially like safe and safe spaces are very important for people to have. And so our company is just helping, increase that transparency so that people can have access to that.
Elisa, congratulations on the fund, and we wish you all the best in your business. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the Recablecast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios 33, or watch anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. I'm Brittany Aubain, filling in for Kibben Aline, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.